This is going to be a mess. If it was me, I would sue everyone until we figured out who's who. When you're dealing with anything dangerous, automobile, a weapon, explosives, whatever it is, there's going to be a litany of policies in place to make sure horrible things don't happen. I think you may have even alluded to it. This is not the first time this has happened. We've seen this happen on film sets in the past. Now, different film sets, different producers might have different policies, but I can exemplify to you a policy that a producer friend told me about, which is as follows. You have an armor on the set. And actually, you know what, before I continue, let me just put something out there. As attorneys, we discuss these things very coldly. We do calculated analysis. I just want to say and just take a moment for Halyna Hutchins, like what a tragedy this is. Imagine what it must have been like to be on that set. So I just want to get that heartfelt message out first before I continue. Let's go about analysis. This is how it was brought to my attention. The armorer is on set. The armorer is responsible for the weapons. The armorer takes the weapons apart, shows everyone the weapons are empty. Multiple people are involved in that process to have eyes on the product and make sure that the guns are not loaded. The armorer then puts the weapon back together. The armorer clears the weapon. The armorer then hands the weapon over to the actor. That is one way that I've heard how you're supposed to do it. It sounds like a very safe way. On this set, it sounds like the assistant director was the one who handed the weapon to the actor. It also sounds like a lot of people left the set, probably for good reason, because of violations in terms of how they were going about taking care of the cast and crew on the show, on the film. And when you start to put this together, it starts to paint a horrible picture of liability. I heard another news outlet was saying there was previous accidental discharges on this exact set. You have people complaining about working conditions. We're in this kind of corona world where people are 16-hour days and crazy stuff like that. So not only I think is there a legal analysis here, which I'm happy to actually jump into, there's also something to be said for the big picture, the conditions that people in the industry are facing today within the entertainment industry.
Yeah. And you're talking about liability. A lot of people are guessing, is the AD, the first AD liable? Is actually the producers? Is actually, the actor? Or who's liable for this?
Okay. So let me talk about California law, just because that is where I'm the most proficient. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers in California might want to know this. But there is a system in California called workers' compensation. And that is what makes things somewhat complex. If this injury happened in California, you'd have to start your analysis with the first question: who is the employer? Someone might say, what does the employer have to do with this? Someone got shot on the set. If you're injured on a set where you are employed as an employee, your recourse against your employer for that injury falls under what's called workers' compensation exclusivity remedy. And what that implies is the person who is injured on the set, insofar as suing the employer, must go through workers' compensation. Well, what's the big deal about workers' compensation? In work comp, there's no such thing as pain and suffering and non-economic damages. That means liability is narrowed in workers' compensation for the employer. What I think might happen on this set is everyone is going to take their hands like this and say, I'm the employer, I want to deal with workers' compensation. Why? Why would a defendant be incentivized to say that they're the employer of the slain employee? Because if they're not the employer, then you can go after them for personal injury, wrongful death, which is what I do. And that is a different area of the law. That area of the law includes pain and suffering. As a result, the personal injury has a wider scope of liability and a higher bar for damages. So this is going to be a mess. If it was me, I would sue everyone until we figured out who's truly the employer, who's not the employer. And what you're going to have is a mishmash of some work comp and a lot of third-party liability, which is what I do, pointing fingers at who's running what. And this gets super complicated. I understand that Alec Baldwin is not just a person who pulled the trigger, but he's a producer on the show.
Yeah, he's a producer.
Yeah, so is he a co-employee or is he the employer? Or is he both? Or does it get complicated? And, when they say he's a producer, is he just a credited producer? Is he a financial producer? Did he have creative control? Did he have day-to-day control on set? How much control between him and the director? Million questions that you can ask. And in California, the first thing to figure out is who's the employer, who's not the employer, and everything will trickle down from that.
So could actually Alec Baldwin be charged with manslaughter, do you think? Or is it like too much speculation or too much?
I would say it probably is too soon. I would also caution, I'm not a criminal attorney. I don't know criminal law. It's certainly possible. It's certainly possible that, the district attorney in that state wants to make a point. It's certainly possible that worse things happened on set that we don't know about. If he showed just raw, gross negligence in the way he was going about things, maybe the district attorney gets involved and you look at criminal stuff. If not, at the very least, he's looking at civil stuff. He's looking at the stuff that I do, the personal injury, the wrongful death, and the other stuff that I don't do, the workers' compensation.
How can we make people more liable or more aware of this type of things?
There is the argument you could use CGI. I've seen that said. Another director says, I want authenticity in the lighting or the this and that. What I would say is, I don't know what the policies were on that particular set. And there's two ways to attack this. Either there weren't policies or the policies existed but weren't followed. And that's two different ways you can go about it. Let's say this set had good policies. I'd be willing to bet they weren't followed.
No.
Just like I said to you earlier, an armor takes apart the gun, shows everyone that it's empty, puts it back together, clears the gun again, then hands it to the actor. Were those rules followed? Did those rules even exist? So I think the first inquiry is, what were the on-set rules? What were the on-set policies? Were they verbal? Were they written? Can we see copies of the written documents? Who's in charge of enforcing these policies? Now, if it turns out these policies didn't exist, you're looking at a much heavier situation where, in my humble opinion, the production crew wasn't taking things as seriously as they should have. Those policies, when you have a weapon, should be in place. And, you say, how do we make people more aware of these things? It's such a tragedy. And yet it happens in the middle of a discussion about the working conditions of this industry. With great loss, sometimes there is something that can come from it, which is, I think a lot of people now are talking about it. It's unfortunate that it's under these circumstances. It's very unfortunate. We should have talked about it sooner. Yeah. But people are talking about it and people are seeing. And look, from a guy who does a lot of work in the world of employment through my labor and my harassment work, I know that industry isn't always treated the best. And it is something that needs to be discussed at the union level, at the executive level.